So good morning and welcome. We are excited to feature today at the LABC's 15th Annual Sustainability Summit, a new monthly interview series from our 38th Governor of California, Arnold Schwarzenegger, called Arnold's Stammtisch. Today, he will interview a good friend of the LABC, LA City Council President, Nury Martinez. And for those of you not familiar with his format or the word Stammtisch, it usually refers to a table for regulars. And in Austria, it's quite common for one big table in a restaurant to be set aside for locals, but I will let the governor explain. So why is the LABC so excited to share this interview with you between the governor and the council president? We are excited because these two leaders are the LABC's absolute favorites on climate, with the governor having created a state mandate for 1 million solar roofs that inspired us in LA to become the #1 solar city in America. And because of the council president's leadership on equity in the environment, it helped us win a major state grant to help transform Pacoima into a clean energy community with new investment and jobs. We are also hopeful about the future and the potential of their combined leadership, the governor globally and the council president expanding her reach in the region. As you know, we have a rich history in California of leaders, regardless of parties, making a big difference. With Governor Reagan creating the California Air Resources Board, Governor Schwarzenegger propelling California to the forefront of the nation on renewable energy, Governor Brown signing SB 100 into law, setting a 100% clean electricity goal for the state by 2045, and most recently, Governor Newsom with his executive order requiring sales of all new passenger vehicles to be zero emission by 2035. Similarly, we truly appreciate the leadership that Council President Martinez has shown on climate justice within the council and as former executive director of Pacoima Beautiful. Her Green New Deal agenda focuses on environmental justice first and foremost for low-income communities that historically suffer from polluted air, water, and land more than other communities. Addressing the climate crisis will require an all-hands-on-deck approach, and we are lucky to have the leadership of the former governor and the council president. And the LABC is honored to lead the business community on sustainability issues, having led the effort to secure the DWP feed-in tariff, a solar rooftop program that resulted in 40% of the projects being located in low-income communities, providing clean energy and new investment. And we are the first business group to support the city of LA as it transitions LADWP to 100% clean energy. And we like the faster track, Nury, by 2035. So today I am proud to introduce our 38th Governor, Arnold Schwarzenegger, and his Stammtisch with Council President Nury Martinez as they discuss the importance of equity and prioritizing underserved communities in our transition to a sustainable economy. Governor.
Wow, Mary, you just blew me away. How do you remember all this stuff?
I don't. I have a script.
Unbelievable.
Okay.
That's what a great introduction. And you're absolutely right. You pronounce the word Stammtisch the right way, which a lot of people have a problem with that. They say Stammtisch and Stammtisch, but you said Stammtisch. That's exactly how you pronounce it. This is right. And you're right. It is kind of like an idea because we have in Austria, every restaurant has kind of a table for the locals. So the waitress doesn't even sit anyone there that is from the outside. She knows exactly who are the locals, who come there and who do the gossiping and the talking and all of that stuff and doing business there and stuff like that. So that's why I have, since it comes from Austria, I have my Austrian hat here. As you can see, I can wear the Austrian hat. I have my Austrian kind of a mentality, but at the same time, I also can go and put my American hat on.
I love it.
So I'm both. I'm kind of born in Austria, but I'm made in America. So this is what this is. And I'm absolutely delighted, I have to say, to talk to Nury today, because you are so passionate about the environment. And this is why I think it is really great to have you, do this interview and do this kind of Stammtisch. So the first question, Nury, I have for you is, I'm really fascinated how you got so passionate. What made you get into the environmental issue in the first place? I mean, how did you become passionate in this?
Well, thank you for having me, Governor. It's great to see you. I've been following your work since you were in an elected office. So it's good to be with you this afternoon. You know what? I like to tell the story about how I became an environmentalist not out of choice, but basically because I had to. So if you're familiar with the community that I grew up in Pacoima in the Northeast San Fernando Valley, for generations, the Northeast San Fernando Valley has been a dumping ground for things like power plants and, factories and freeways and high polluting industries that no other community, or at least no other affluent community in Los Angeles would ever put up with. And so I grew up with children that would carry around inhalers because they suffer from asthma, or older residents who have had heart attacks and other illnesses caused or exacerbated by pollution. And so these are sort of the community folks that I grew up with. And in the Northeast San Fernando Valley, an environmentalist is just, we didn't become an environmental community because we read it in a textbook or someone spoke to us about it in college. It's because basically it's your life depends on it. And so you have to quickly begin to read up on what are the causes of some of your illnesses. And a lot of it has to do with pollution and the environment that we currently live in and are raising our children in. And so it's a matter of life or death sometimes. And you quickly have to figure out where the causes of some of this pollution that's making you sick are coming from.
Mm-hmm. Now, obviously, you thought about this a lot and you're working towards that. What is the goal now? How do we know now, and I totally agree with you on the problem, that some people are more affected by pollution because they live close to a freeway, or they intentionally put freeways in areas that are minority areas, and therefore they get affected. Whatever it is, or like, for instance, we know that at the port of Los Angeles, which is the biggest port and the busiest port, and it's a fantastic port, but I mean, people are affected with cancer, that they get cancer around that area because of the diesel trucks and of all of the stuff that's going on, the traffic that's going in and out, and the ships that are coming in. And some of those ships, when they keep their engines running, that's an equivalent of pollution of like 10,000 cars. In 24 hours, they burn more fuel than 10,000 cars. So, I mean, this is staggering. So the question is, how do we fix this stuff now?
So we need to broaden our focus. I mean, not just fighting for or against harmful things that exist in our neighborhoods, but also like what I just mentioned, the freeways and the factories, but also we have to advocate for positive amenities in our neighborhoods. How do we mitigate some of these polluting factors in our neighborhoods? And you would do that by advocating for more open space and parks, creating safer streets, cleaner streets in our neighborhood. For example, when I was the executive director of Pacoima Beautiful, the only environmental justice organization in the San Fernando Valley, we advocated for the Pacoima Wash, which is a tributary to the LA River. We wanted to create a vision for how we're going to convert this vacant, blighted lot along the river into parks so that we can actually give neighborhoods access to a walkable area where they can actually exercise and enjoy an evening out, as opposed to being completely park we're a desert out here. There is no space for us to enjoy even a simple walk in the evening. And so how do we begin to transform our communities and bring out some of these things that perhaps other areas in Los Angeles have? So I think it's not only about talking about the negative things that we currently live with, but it's actually trying to mitigate and fix some of the injustices that have been created through poor planning. How did anyone think 40 years ago, 50 years ago, that putting factories across the street from neighborhoods was a good idea, or building landfills in communities where people were going to raise children? These all have negative impacts on our health and our quality of life. So how do we begin to fix that as policymakers? And we start to do that by addressing some of these polluting factors, but also what do we need to do to plan things a little bit different and give these kids a fighting chance not to have to grow up with asthma?
Yeah, no, you're right. But I mean, the question really is, how do we now go ahead and reduce the pollution is really the question, because as you know, that for the last several decades, I think mayors in Los Angeles have talked about we got to reduce pollution, and I'm going to be the mayor that do it if you elect me and all that stuff. And then they were elected, and I didn't see much changes other than what was done on a state level. I think that there were some great changes made at the ports, because I think that we forbid some of those big ships to go and let the engines run, that they have to plug into electric, powered, I think cables and all this stuff. But I mean, what is really the solution that we really move forward and reduce the pollution in Los Angeles?
Well, the city of Los Angeles is becoming a leader in climate action. The Department of Water and Power, for example, is the largest municipality utility in the United States. And the city council has really been pushing to make the grid power, the power grid 100% carbon neutral by 2020, by 2035, which is what Mary had just mentioned. So we are lessening our reliance on imported water with the goal of eventually get all of our water locally is what the goal is. And we're working on creating a 100% diversion of garbage from landfills, which has to be a mandate. It definitely would help communities like mine, where I have some of the largest landfills. A lot of them have been closed, but nevertheless, they're still there. And these areas we just need to make sure that we are transitioning to a more equitable way of creating policy that's actually going to make a dent in climate change. It's the only way to do it. I introduced a motion over a year ago to create the Green New Deal for Los Angeles, which actually would prioritize communities of color, the very communities that have been dealing with some of these polluting factories in our neighborhoods. We need to start with them first. It's great to talk about the Santa Monica wildlife and other issues in and around Los Angeles, but if we do not start with communities of color, these frontline communities that everyone talks about advocating for, if we don't start in a harbor in South LA, Borough Heights, and the Northeast San Fernando Valley, we are doing a disservice to another generation of children that are having to grow up with having to deal with these negative health impacts to their own health.
Right, no, absolutely. I believe personally that subnational governments are really kind of responsible, the way when you look back in history, are responsible for cleaning up 70% of the pollution, even though the negotiations are going on a national level. And when you have the UN do COP 26 and 25 and 24 and all those different COPs, they are only including in the negotiations the heads of states. But the heads of states, I mean, Washington does not really clean up the environment, what you just talked about, to help the minorities with the environment. That's not what Washington does. So to have them on the table and not have subnational governments, people like you that know the subject and is passionate about it, to have you also sit there on the table and negotiate and talk about your experience on a subnational level, like on a city level or on a state level or on a provincial level and all this kind of thing. So don't you think it would be wise for people like you to kind of like fight for getting included in those discussions where they make decisions, like for instance, COP26, where a lot of decisions would take place? I think it would be good if mayors and people that represent huge areas like the Valley, like you do, to go in there and to participate in those meetings.
Right. I often say politics is local. And if we do not start electing policymakers that understand these communities and its complexities, it's very difficult to have advocates in Washington, D.C. if they can't relate to the very people who desperately need their help. And let's just be honest, a lot of communities of color are being taken for granted because we're not the highest propensity voters. We're not necessarily engaged in politics, and it takes a long time to reach us and really make us believe or feel like there's actually going to be change made if you get the right people elected. And so that's incumbent upon us. We have to organize as a community and elect people who start to really advocate for us, not only at the city level, at the state level, but in Washington, D.C. There's often a disconnect between the policymakers at the federal level and what is happening in communities of color. And then people are just become, they become sort of, they don't care. They feel that there's such a disconnect. There's no reason to participate in our political process. And that's a huge mistake, because we've got to start electing people who are listening to actual communities who are suffering from environmental racism up and down our state.
No, absolutely. But that's what I'm saying. Imagine if you think that there's a disconnect between the locals and the federal government, Washington. Imagine how you go to a international meeting, like let's say like they're coming up now in November, COP26, and where the whole world meets. Imagine the disconnect that is there. That's why I'm saying it would be great if we would have subnational governments represented there. They've been fighting for that for years, that you got to listen, but always in the end, the biggest events and the biggest negotiations is always amongst the world leaders. It's always the head of Germany, the head of England, the head of Spain, and all the heads of the various different countries and states, but not really subnational governments. So I think we have to be fighting for getting included in those kind of meetings and negotiations. When it comes to research and development, I think that Los Angeles is really a shining example of that. I think we have the best incubators for green technology and all that stuff. Is this something that you also support? Because I think a lot of the creativity comes actually from right here.
I do, and I think you're absolutely right. We just need to make sure that it's focused in the very communities that have dealt with this the longest. And so, environmentalism cannot be an abstract conversation, and we need to ensure that the technology that's being, worked on, the green jobs that people continue to talk about. One of the ways to mitigate some of this environmental injustices in some of these communities is to bring that technology into our neighborhoods and to bring those green jobs into our neighborhoods. That's how you make things right, how you fix the injustices that have been created in these neighborhoods, is invest in us. Yeah. The workers are here. Use our public school system to create a pipeline to create that workforce that you're going to need to be able to you bring those green jobs into these neighborhoods. There's a lot of talent in our neighborhoods. Unfortunately, there is not a lot of will to tap into these talents, and that's what we have to continue to advocate for.
Right. Do you think that the environmental community is communicating the right way? Because the reason I'm asking you that is, I just thought about it because you have mentioned the word pollution several times, the pollution in those minority areas. And I said to myself, well, here's a person that really talks about what the problem is. It's pollution. Because so many of the environmentalists talk always about climate change and about, all of those kind of things that most people don't understand. But people understand pollution. Pollution is the very thing that everyone understands. So I'm just wondering, do you think they should change maybe their kind of communication strategy and talk more about pollution rather than about climate change, or to connect the two so people understand that it's pollution that creates the climate change? Because so many times when you do a poll, which we have done many times, and you say, how many are concerned about climate change, you would get like a number like 17%. But as soon as you say how many people are concerned about pollution, it gets over 50%. So that's why I like that when you mentioned pollution several times, I said, well, she gets it. She knows what the problem really is.
Well, it's not that complicated. I also did not read it in a book. So, I live with it and I grew up and I still live in these neighborhoods. I mean, we're still pushing back on some of these polluting factories in our neighborhoods. But that's a really good point, Governor. And the environmental community or advocates need to communicate with people of color. Communities of color already know and have a deep conversation and understanding to the environment, because we understand it, because we get sick from it, from the fact that we live under these circumstances. And we overwhelmingly support raising taxes to help environmental causes. There's data to actually show that. We will show up to the polls and support initiatives like Measure M, for transit and measure A for parks. I mean, we will do that over and over again. And these communities absolutely get the importance of environmental issues. The issue is that we cannot just talk about saving wildlife habitat in the Santa Monica Mountains and leave communities like Pacoima completely out of the environmental conversation. You need to understand these neighborhoods. You need to be able to hire the very people who live there, who can be their best advocates for themselves and their communities. And the advocates just need to do a better job of communicating with these areas. For example, you have to connect what's happening with climate change to what's happening in Panorama City, in Boyle Heights, and South LA. You can't talk about it and exclude these neighborhoods. You have to go in there. They will be able to tell you that you probably can point to 3 factors in their surrounding neighborhoods as to what is causing some of their illnesses. It's not that complicated. And you can just, in basic English, they will be able to tell you how important it is to remedy this and fight for these things. So I think we're not involving communities of color the way we should, or we're not communicating with them as effectively as we should. They will show up, but you have to relate to what they're talking about because they are living with it day in and day out.
No, absolutely, I agree with you. I think that Los Angeles is kind of a strange place, I have to say, unlike any other place in the world. And the reason I'm saying is because we are, I mean, number one in so many things. I mean, think about it. You know, if you think about the movie business, show business in general, if it is about Silicon Beach, you know, where we have Google, Snapchat, and Netflix, and all those guys here, we are like on top of the aerospace industry, tourism. I think there's no one that can beat us. We have more tourists coming here. We have the busiest ports, and the incubators of green technology, and the list goes on and on. But at the same time, we're also number one about all the negative stuff. You know, when it comes to homeless issues, when it comes to pollution, when it comes to crime, there's so many issues that where we're traffic congestions. There's so many issues that kind of like bugs us down and makes us never kind of like the city like Vienna that gets always voted every year of being the most favorable living, the city to live in. And Los Angeles is kind of ending up on the bottom there. So I just say, how can we ever move Los Angeles up there and get rid of some of those problems that I just mentioned, like the homeless issues or the traffic congestion? And again, it's something that mayors promise us every time there's an election, but then we're ending up with the worst problem 4 years later and 8 years later and 12 years later and so on.
These are very complex issues, and I can get into homelessness, but that's not the topic for today. I can give you some examples of how Los Angeles is leading, and it's not always, I know that headlines can be sometimes negative, but on COVID recovery, Governor, we've been leading nationwide in terms of what we've done for millions of Angelenos to try to get them back on their feet. This city led on rent relief to ensure, you know, almost over $350 million we've allocated to make sure that people are stay put and don't lose their housing. Utility relief, just to get people by in order to pay their utilities during COVID. A right to counsel for families who are on the verge of getting evicted, making sure they have legal representation to keep them housed. We set up remote schools at some of our most underserved parks throughout Los Angeles. We paid hazard pay for our grocery workers, for our essential workers who risked their lives just to be able to go into work during COVID so that we can, you know, have groceries and feed our families. And the list goes on and on and on. Los Angeles is actually became the model for the entire country when President Biden adopted the American Rescue Plan and the family plan that came right after it. That is modeled after what we did as a council here in Los Angeles to help our residents through the pandemic. So although I know sometimes the headlines might seem negative, this council has done an extraordinary job leading us through some of the most difficult year of our city's history, if not our country. So I'm confident that we're going to be able to take these issues on. They're complicated. There's differences of opinion, but we are trying to do our best to create a more sustainable, equitable city for all of our residents. And that's, at the end of the day, what's really important to me. It's got to be equitable, and we've got to make sure that all of our residents are moving forward and we're not leaving anybody behind.
Now, you were complimenting the council. How is my buddy Kevin De Leon doing? I mean, who just was newly elected and is going in there. And I said to him, I said, look, I hope that you can go and lick the homeless problem. I said, the challenge is on. So I'm curious of how he's going to perform in it. But how is he doing so far?
He's doing great. He hasn't been here very long, so it's been a couple of months. I want to say it's been about 6, 7 or 8 months that he's been on the city council. He comes from a very large institution, or in Sacramento, so working at a smaller scale. It's been interesting, but I have a lot of members who I serve with that used to serve in the legislature. So you probably also know Mr. Koretz, Mr. Paul Kokorian, Mr. Gil Cedillo.
Of course, Gil.
Mr. Curran Price. And so there's a number of these guys who served with you in the legislature, and now they're on the city council. So sometimes they got to get the Sacramento hat off and put the city hat on. And what people care in Los Angeles is cleaning up these encampments, housing people, and being able to provide services to unsheltered community, and also start to clean up the streets of Los Angeles. And sometimes taking off that Sacramento hat and putting on the city hat can be kind of challenging, but it's been fun to watch them figure that out. And they're doing a great job.
Well, I just want to tell you that I love Boyle Heights and that whole area there. As you know, I've been kind of like one of the people that have been supporting the Hollenbeck Youth Center there with Danny Hernandez. For the last 30 years now, we have been running after-school programs there. He's the one, Danny Hernandez, that introduced me actually to after-school programs and to that need for especially inner city kids to have a place to go after school so they don't roam around in the streets and stuff like that and get into trouble.
They have a huge Christmas giveaway, don't they? They give out bikes and toys.
30 years.
Huge.
We did the Thanksgiving.
They do that too.
Then we did a Christmas toy giveaway. And I just sponsored also the vaccine to go and offer money to people to get the vaccine there at the Hollenbeck Center and all that stuff. So, I'm a big fan of that area. I think they're doing terrific. There's the thing I love about it is when I go out there, I get this feeling like I got in a lot of times in Austria where there's a lot of hardworking people around it. People that work for a living and they're very proud of the little homes out there. They keep homes really clean and neat, and they work hard. And I see these people coming to the Hollenbeck Center. So I've been a big fan of this whole, area there, and of course of the Latinos in any case. But I mean, it's really wonderful to work with them there.
Yeah, and it's those hardworking families we need to show up for. It's that single mom that's holding 2 jobs, raising 3 kids, trying to do her best to stay housed, to pay her utilities, to get to her kids to school. It's, we have example after example of working class families that are doing everything right, but they're one emergency away from becoming homeless, and they're one emergency away from losing it all. And those are the folks we need to stabilize and help and double down on. And that's been, most of my work in politics and this career is been their advocate, because just like my parents who came here with nothing, they bought a little house in Pacoima, they held on to it, and they raised 2 daughters, and it showed us the importance of community and giving back and being of service to people and showing up for working folks who are doing everything right. And we need to make sure we show up for them. So
absolutely, and I think the key thing is for us all to work together.
Right.
Because, no one can do it alone. I always say, people always say I'm the example of the self-made man. I said no. I had millions of people helping me. I mean, I had 5 million plus people voting for me to become governor. I didn't make myself governor. So it takes a lot of work, a lot of help. So I think if we work together, Los Angeles is such a special city. I love Los Angeles. It's a great place. I think the key thing is that everyone works together, and then we can solve all of those problems. Doesn't matter if you're a Republican, if you're a Democrat, if you're a minority, if you're white, if you're a woman, a man. I think the more people work together, that's what I always stress, the faster we can go and solve all of the problems. But anyway, thank you very much for this great interview. It was insightful, it was terrific. And the reason why I'm asking the last question about all these different issues is because I wanted people to see that you are very well, you're a very deep thinking person about all of the issues, not just about the environment, even though this is more an interview about the environment.
I appreciate the time. It was great to see you. You look terrific.
Thank you.
And I wish you well. Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much. Good luck with everything, okay?
Thank you.
Thank you.